Hello again, everyone. This is Stan Scott,
And I'm Scott Konopasek.
and this is the 10th episode of the Foggy Bottom Line podcast. We're recording this on October 14th for publication this week. And I guess today we're going to talk a little bit about the government shutdown. I did a short post on that that you should see in your feed today. And uh, and then about the role of government more generally. But first, Scott, you had a big event last night, a campaign event last night. Things going well?
Yeah, in fact, the last 3 days I've been meeting with three different county Democratic committees, getting everyone enthusiastic. We're 3 weeks away from the election, and things are going well. Our digital campaign is very active and getting a lot of engagement from folks. So, thank you everyone who's engaged with our content.
Yeah, and if you haven't seen Scott on Facebook or LinkedIn, some of these other social media platforms, take a look, share, like, make a comment, tell us what you think. Even if it's we love some constructive criticism over here at FBL. But Scott, earlier this morning we were talking about the shutdown, and you made a point about this one being uh, an interesting one in one way, that it's the first one that's happened when one party controls all three branches of government, right?
Right. Right. Yeah, I went back and did a little bit of research going back to 1980, and there's always been some split government when we've had these shutdowns in the past. Some disagreement, mostly around social spending and medical spending in particular. The big long one in 2019 was about funding for the wall. Um, but in
Mm-hmm.
every case except this one, uh, there's been they haven't had a trifecta. By trifecta, what I mean is they Republican control or single party control the House, the Senate, and the presidency. So I think it's interesting that um, that with all the power that they have, with all the levers of government granted them by the voters in the Constitution, they still fail to be able to govern effectively. And in fact, the budget shutdowns are not uh, really the problem. They're a symptom of a larger problem. The
Right.
larger problem being that Congress can't pass a budget. So we have the shutdown now because a continuing resolution hasn't been passed to continue spending from the previous levels. But we're not even supposed to get to that point. We're supposed to have a budget that's proposed by the president, debated by the House and Senate, and passed and adopted prior to October 1st. So we're two problems downstream from government
Right.
functioning appropriately.
Right. Well, and folks, that this kind of thing is actually pretty complicated. Scott and I are both political scientists by training. I have taught U.S. government at three different universities, and well, four actually. And the the trick, the thing you have to remember, there's two things that you need to keep in mind when you think about this shutdown. The first is that writing a budget, when Congress does a budget, they basically write the budget, and this is what the big beautiful bill was, or the big ugly bill, depending on your perspective, was basically the budget. So um, Congress has passed budgets. The problem is they have to authorize the spending. So it's actually separate legislation that authorizes the spending to actually take place. And this is what the continuing resolution does. And the continuing resolution, because they haven't actually authorized the spending in the big beautiful bill, you end up with a continuing resolution that continues spending as it was before that budget was passed. And we're still doing continuing resolutions on budgets from what is it, Scott, 6 years ago, or is it even longer? Might even be longer.
Yeah, I think it was since the 2019 budget, I
Yeah.
think. But the other thing about a CR is, it's got a time period associated with it.
Right.
And the CR that has triggered the shutdown expires in December, right before the holidays. So that means we have to go through the same kabuki dance another time before the end
Right.
of the year if it passes. And we have no reason to think it's going to be any different. That's going to play out any differently than what is playing out right now. So it really, to me, points to the dysfunction, not of the institution of Congress, but of those in power in Congress. A failure to be able
Right.
to lead and govern. Many of these guys over the years have campaigned on government is bad, government's too big, we need less government. So they got elected by people who want them to break government. So we
Right.
shouldn't be surprised that now that they're in power, that's what they're doing.
Right.
We act
Right.
like, oh, where did this come from? Well, Americans over the years in different communities voted for these people that said government's bad. Elect me and I'll go break it. And,
Right.
and now we're dealing with it. The problem is, and I think we're going to talk about this some more, is people don't always have a good definition or understanding of what government is or what government does, and how government is good and essential to the quality of their life on a daily basis.
Right. And yeah, we definitely are going to get to that here shortly. Real quick first, though, it's got to be made perfectly clear to everyone that the Republicans could end this shutdown today. And the only thing stopping them is that Democrats in the Senate can filibuster this continuing resolution. But the filibuster is not in the Constitution. It's not a federal law. It's simply a Senate rule that Republican majorities could end for, and they could just end it for continuing resolution votes. They don't have to end it for everything.
Right.
But if they really wanted this shutdown to end, they could end the filibuster, and then they could pass a budget. They could pass an authorization bill that's not a continuing resolution. They don't need the Democrats to do any of that because they control all three branches of government. But,
right. So they suspended the filibuster, suspended the rule, cloture, to pass the big ugly bill.
Right.
So they have a recent history of doing it, and it's become kind of routine to suspend the filibuster when considering Supreme Court nominees, so they can get them passed with just a simple majority. And Mitch McConnell is who we have to thank for that. But
yep, that's right. Yep.
Yeah.
Well,
so whether you like the filibuster or you don't like the filibuster, it's important to know that it's not immutable. It's a choice,
right.
And the Senate can choose to do things differently and choose to pass their own continuing resolution, and then take the consequences of it.
Right, and that's what they're worried about is the consequences. But and everyone, I went into this in a little bit more depth. It's a little, I think, 10-minute spot report that I did, so you can find that on the channel as well if you'd like to get a little bit deeper analysis of that. But one of the things these shutdowns do is they stop most non-essential government services, and of course, non-essential depends on how you define essential. Obviously, military forces are still operating, and apparently ICE is an essential function. Some other branches of government, Social Security checks will go out. Trump just set it up so that the soldiers would get paid. And I remember when I was in the Army, we didn't get paid until after the shutdown ended, which was problematic for some folks. But it causes hardships for people, and it sort of begs the question: if the government stops completely or almost completely, and there's some government service that's at least temporarily not being provided, who does that hurt, and what kind of questions does that get us to ask about the role of government and what it ought to be doing in the first place, right? And we've talked about on this podcast before about something that Scott and I like to call the social infrastructure. And clearly government itself is part of that infrastructure. The Constitution, the set of laws, federal laws and state laws across the country, are part of that social infrastructure. They build the framework that we live under. So, Scott, let's talk. What do you think? What's the first thing that pops into your head when I ask the question, what should government do and what should it not do so much? What's the role of government in our social infrastructure?
Yeah, first of all, let me just say I don't like the non-essential designation of some government services or essential services, because that implies that some services are not essential and maybe we shouldn't be doing it. So
Right.
I would just start with saying that it's I wouldn't characterize some services as being essential over others. I guess I'll just leave it at that. But the government really does a lot of fundamental things for us that we just take for granted. You know, it starts with providing us public safety and security. You know, having cops on the street, having 911 responses, having a court system, uh, uh, providing those basic security-oriented systems. When we think of security, we tend to think of Department of Defense and that, and certainly that provides us security from outside, from foreign threats. But government provides that level of safety that is kind of known as the social contract. You know, people created government, agreed to fund it to be more secure in the way that they live, to have people who would be cops, who would be firefighters, who would be EMT, and you know, so I guess what I'm saying is government services start with that. That's the
Right.
basic thing, and then health and welfare, general welfare, quality of life issues kind of roll out from that, as well as an economic safety net. But there's a whole lot of services that government provides that aren't really obvious to everyone, from weather reports to inspecting the food supply to, and well, CDC is an infamous organization now, but a couple of years ago, nobody even heard of it, providing public
Right.
health guidance for us. So there's a number of agencies or a number of services that government provides that people are just not really aware of.
Yeah, and all of what you just said, and I think that the state, and I use the state as a broad term, meaning government at the local up to the federal level, right? The state, generally speaking, has a monopoly on force, and that's what allows the state to create this public safety infrastructure. At the federal level, when we're talking about a shutdown, we laugh about three-letter agencies, but you're talking about the CIA, Central Intelligence. You're talking about Homeland Security, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. All of these agencies that protect us from both internal and external threats, right? Criminal gangs, foreign military forces, terrorists, obviously. The FBI is a big one. And if we lose these services, then that makes us a lot less safe. And I think one thing to think about, and this is the prime example of this, is that there are some things, some parts of what we call the social infrastructure that markets will never do, right?
Right.
A free market will not build a highway between Washington, D.C. and Seattle because there's not any money in it. They can't make a profit doing that. So we have to do that collectively as a group, as a society. If we want that kind of infrastructure, we have to do that together. And that takes the state operating with all of our support, including some of our tax money. And so you can sort of extrapolate from there what other things do free markets fail? Where else do we see market failure? We see it in healthcare. When it gets to be too expensive to cover my illness, the insurance companies say no, and if I can't write the check, I don't get health care, and I might not even survive,
Right.
right? So I think one of the, when we start brainstorming about what government should and should not do, clearly public safety is one of those. Fires, fire departments,
Mhm.
those kinds of things. Um, but also this, these big projects, this big stuff that we want to have that makes us more efficient, makes us happier, right? But it's not something a corporation is going to do by itself without help, without government subsidies at least. And any thoughts on that?
Yeah, yeah. And we've talked about this in the past, how one of the reasons that government is so important in a capitalist society is our first inclination is to rely on markets and private enterprise to solve our problems, to provide our services. But there are many instances where they can't do that, or it's not economically viable, and they need the power of the state or the support of the state in order to provide those services. Um, but also, when we talk about government and government services, we have multiple levels of government, and it's good just to keep in mind, because we can't, when we talk about government, we're not just talking about the federal government. We're talking about state government and local government, county government, city government that provide municipal services. So garbage collection is one of those uh, services where there's a market failure. Now, there are companies that actually contract with government for the right to pick up the garbage and to go put it in a landfill, but the landfill is not privately owned. It's owned by the government, at least in our area here. So it can control, how the waste is disposed of, and that. So the post office is another uh, function of government established by the Constitution, although it currently doesn't receive federal funding. It provides a service that nobody else was available to do, which is to deliver mail to folks. So, as a capitalist country, our first inclination is to let the market solve it, but the market can't solve everything, and that's where government can play such a critical role in the quality of our life. Who's going to build a public park and a playground? There is nobody in the private sector who's going to do that.
Right,
Uh,
right. Yeah, so it's not just big projects. It's just really any project that improves quality of life, but is difficult or impossible to monetize. Now, I mean, you could charge people to use the park, right? But that starts looking like a golf course,
or
right?
Disneyland, yeah.
Or Disneyland, right? So the the role of government again is, first of all, provide services that the private markets will not, for one reason or another. Sometimes what this looks like, building a big highway, basically investing and then hiring private companies to go actually lay the asphalt. Sometimes this looks like investment in research that's very expensive and very risky. I mean, medical research is one big one here, right? Without the government subsidies, I'm not sure you ever would have had a private company invest in the research and technology research you would need to do heart transplants, for example, right?
Right.
Medications to get a lot of federal funding and state funding to do the kind of research that's necessary to turn it into a usable medication that actually solves a problem without creating too many new ones. But government also has a role in regulating all these things, right?
Right.
And so that if you think about private markets, where do you go when Scott and I sign a contract? I'm going to provide him a service for a certain amount of money, and then he doesn't like the service. I underperform, or he refuses to pay me once it's complete for one reason or another. Maybe he went bankrupt for other reasons. Maybe he just decided he didn't want to pay me, like Donald Trump did, right?
Right.
When he was building his casinos in Atlantic City. Who adjudicates that? It's government. So this other role, not only regulation, but adjudicating disputes. So, and do we think, Scott, that it's a good idea for government to stop regulating the food supply and inspecting meat,
No,
slaughterhouses and chicken farms?
absolutely not. When we put frame the questions about what government should be doing in specific terms, then our responses are different than when we're just talking about it in the collective. So uh, without courts and a court system, uh, there's contracts between businesses have no force or effect without
Right.
someone to enforce those. So regulation in the court system and contracts and contract law is a fundamental way that government provides a service to business, to private interests,
Right.
to regulate and to make sure that society works properly and that the economy works properly. So when somebody just says blanket against regulation, repeal all regulation, uh, stop and think about: do you want all your contracts to be null and void or
Right.
unenforceable? And it's not just about air safety standards, air safety regulations, highway codes and regulations, uh, which are some of the things that have been controversial over the years. But we need government to regulate the interactions between human beings because we're all a little bit brutish and selfish and self-interested. And part of the role of government is to enforce the rule of law so that we can have some confidence in the performance of ourselves and of someone else. That if they say they're going to do this, then there's a way of enforcing that they're going to do that. So it gets kind of really fundamental and basic.
Right. Yes. And by extension, this sort of adjudication system and the regulatory system sort of creates a level playing field. So this is something capitalism needs very badly, and it's a different podcast episode certainly. But when you start talking about late stage capitalism, one of the things that causes capitalism to go off the rails is when you lose these regulatory regimes that help competitors understand and know what's allowed in the marketplace. What can people do, right? Can is it I listened to this podcast years ago about the early days of milk, selling milk in this country, right, in the United States. And the producers would take a little bit of milk. They take like two or three cups of milk, and they would add water and chalk and other stuff to create half a gallon or a gallon of what looked like milk. It was white, but it was only 20% milk, and people died from drinking this. People gave it to their children, and they drank it, and they died from it. And so, at some point, enough people get killed by this that you see a regulation. But what is it that keeps a slaughterhouse from mixing sawdust in with the ground beef, right? If there's no government regulation and there's no way for the consumer to know. And yeah, theoretically, well, okay, well, my brother died from eating meat from that company X. So I'm going to start buying my meat from company Y. But if there's no regulation, company Y is probably doing the same thing too, because
Right,
that's the only way they can compete, right? So
right. So,
if you're starting a business, you need to know what these rules are, so you know what the parameters are, right?
right. So it's amazing how all these things are kind of interrelated, and we're seeing that play out in front of us. So we do have food safety regulations. Uh, they're on the books, uh, but we just recently fired almost all the inspectors. So what good
Right,
does it do to have regulations if you don't have inspectors,
right, right,
or if you don't have a court system or regulatory dispute process to resolve these issues? And a lot of the cuts that are being made and a lot of things that are being squabbled about in Washington are the very subtle attempts to undermine some
right.
things. Like instead of repealing the regulations, just don't just don't fund any inspectors. Uh, and we're seeing that with the Weather Service. We're seeing it. Well, there's other areas of the economy or government that is going on that we don't see it yet,
Right.
and it won't really uh, make itself known to us until we have some type of failure that calls attention to it.
And it's easy enough to see why businesses dislike some of these regulations. If I'm running a construction business and the government regulations force me to pay for protective equipment for my workers, eye protection, steel-toed boots, I don't know, heavy pants and coveralls or whatever to protect their skin. I have to put up an eye wash station in the, at the job site, perhaps. Different things that I have to do that costs money, right? It increases the cost of doing business for the business owner. But again, it means that the construction company that wants to protect its workers can do so, knowing that other companies have to do that too, which means they're all on the same playing field. See what I mean?
Right, right. It
They're all
doesn't
playing in the same
disadvantage
stadium.
anyone. Yeah.
Right.
No one is disadvantaged because everyone has to play by the same rules. So,
Right.
so those things become the cost of doing business, doing that kind of business.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's a little bit like, all right, let's say there's no rules in football, right? So now I can throw a pass anytime I want. I can hit the guy in the head and steal the ball from him. I can do anything I want. Well, the game of football becomes silly, and nobody's going to want to play it, right? No one's going to want to be in that field, in that stadium. So, and folks, we call this Foggy Bottom Line. I originally came up with this concept, this brand, thinking that some of these discussions, some of the things we're going to talk about, government policy is a big one. The answers aren't going to be super clear cut every time, right? The answer can be foggy. The bottom line is not always black or white. It can be foggy. It can be unclear. And this area certainly qualifies. We can have we could do 6 or 8 of these episodes just talking about what we think government should and should not be doing. There's some pretty obvious ones, right? You start getting into some foggier territory when you start talking about providing health care. Exactly what kind of support should immigrants have in this country? And what should the basis of that support be from the government? You can talk about just what kinds of subsidies should government give for new technology, like clean energy. Should I get a break on the price through a government subsidy if I'm buying an electric car as opposed to a gasoline engine car? Those are good questions, and I think I have good answers, but they're debatable. This is all very foggy, right?
One of the things I really like about our discussion, Stan, is we don't really lay out all the answers. What we do is we talk about the facts, the information, the history, and the questions that need to be asked for someone to think about what the solutions might be. And hopefully we're triggering some critical thinking on the part of our listeners to get them to understand that some of these issues that are presented to them very simplistically through the media, social media, friends, family, whatever, are really pretty complex issues, and they're all interrelated. And if you're going to try to evaluate the effectiveness of a solution or come up with a new solution, these are things that you need to be aware of, that you need to consider. And so I think, as I think back on our conversations that we've been having, I'm not sure we laid out any specific solutions to problems. But we've talked about how those problems happened, what the variables are, who benefits, who loses. We talk about the types of questions that people who are concerned about these things should be asking themselves or others.
Right. And, now that you mention it, I don't think we really have. And I'm very happy to tell anyone what I think policy ought to look like. Right. I mean, I think that the Medicare for All bill, and I've read all 800 pages of it, I think that's good legislation. I think it's good policy. I think it would improve quality of life for Americans, and it would make us more productive as a society. Right. And if you take a very careful look at it, what it would cost and what kind of changes it would make, It looks like a very good idea to me. But you're right, Scott, and this has always been my project with Foggy Bottom Line. When I started this years ago, was to try to assess what's going on in politics, what's going on in the economy, some other silly areas like maybe sports or something like that, right? Entertainment, uh, uh, but to try to get people to understand what's really going on, and to get and then to think critically about what kinds of solutions we need, and this has always been about sort of I'm a progressive, and I'll own up to that as
Mhm.
quickly as anyone. But I would call myself a sort of a practical progressive, in that I don't think we're going to get from where we are today as an economy to the Star Trek economy, which progressives dream about, in 2 3 years. We're not going to get there. It's going to take 100 years to do that, but we have to start somewhere, and that starts with managing change. And and this is another thing government can help with, right? Is managing that change, stopping extremist change, slowing things down a little bit. And I think this is something that most conservatives should be kind of trying to do, right?
You would think so. That's kind of built into the name conservative versus progressive. Uh,
Yeah.
but your comments have triggered another thought in mind. Often we try to find that silver bullet. We try to find
Yeah.
that that one thing that if we do it, it's going to fix everything. Uh, but problems are more tenacious than that, and usually we have to approach things incrementally. I remember being told a couple times, or being asked when I was young, how do you eat an elephant? And I was like, I don't know. And they said one bite at a time,
Yeah.
and I
Right.
was like, okay. I didn't understand that for the longest time. Uh,
Right.
but then when I became a manager and was responsible for really large projects, all of a sudden that you own that elephant. It's your elephant now, and it's right there
Right.
in front of you. And if you're
Yeah.
going to tackle it, you need to break it down into smaller bites, and
Right.
to accomplish things with smaller bites, whether it's developing policy, implementing policy, um, and you need to continuously evaluate how you're doing and move towards a solution. That's what I like about the term progressive, is
Right.
that we're making progress. We're not a rivalist. Uh, you know, we're progressing. We're moving towards that goal. And as we talk about the challenges our country and our society uh, is facing right now, we need to keep in mind that it's the nature of virtually any problem that it can't be tackled all at once.
Right. Right. And what you say about, we talked a little bit before in earlier episodes about the no silver bullet thing, how there's no one overarching set of policies that's going to fix all our problems once and for all. And it's a 100% guaranteed lock that if Medicare for all passed tomorrow and we implemented it over the course of 6 months, a year after implementation, we would realize that we missed something,
Right.
right?
We'd have to go back and fix some things. Yeah.
That it would cause some unintended consequences. There'd be some holes in it that we didn't see before because it was brand new. It would affect some people in a bad way that we didn't predict, and we would have to go back and fix it. It's just a 100% guaranteed lock that would happen. That's not a good reason to not do it, right?
Right.
That isn't a good reason to say no. We're not going to do this because something might go wrong.
Right.
And that's just, you're never going to get anywhere in life as an individual, as a group of people, or as a country if your attitude is the status quo works for me. I'm never going to change it because I'm afraid of what might happen. We
Right.
Right.
And I think that's a part of the approach of conservatives nowadays, is that they're unwilling to try something if they can't be guaranteed that it's going to work the very first time and every
Right.
time.
Right.
So sort of letting perfection be the enemy of good. Uh,
Right. And there's no policy, there's no program, private or government, that's going to be completely without fraud or cheating. It just isn't possible. That's just the nature of humans, that there's some core percentage of us out there that are just going to do something that's against the rules because it benefits us, it benefits someone we care about, or because it hurts someone we don't care
Right.
about. Right.
Someone's always going to run that stop sign.
Right.
You just don't know when and who. But it doesn't
Yeah.
mean you shouldn't have a stop sign.
Right.
Uh,
Exactly.
and
Exactly.
and one of the things that I think progressives need to come to grips with is, we've been talking about all the good the government does, all the services it provides, and we've hinted that it's not necessarily perfect, that there's some iterations that we have to go through to get better. But progressives should realize that there are inefficiencies in government.
Yep.
There,
Yep.
there is fraud and there is waste.
Right.
And we need to acknowledge that, so we start looking for it and fixing it and eliminating it. Uh, what's going on right now, though, in the name of capturing waste, fraud, and abuse, is the destruction of the system, the destruction of our institutions that provide these critical services, if not to us, to our neighbors or to industries and things that we do depend on. So I think as progressives, we need to realize that, hey, government can do better. Government can be cheaper. It can be smaller and still be effective. We just need people who know how to do that to be in charge instead of the guy with a chainsaw.
Right.
Nobody can fix anything by breaking it. I know in the tech world, they say move fast and break things. And that might work in software development or in an entrepreneurial model, a startup model, but it doesn't work in government. You can't move fast and you can't break things.
Well, if you're looking for fraud, waste, and abuse in government, you need a laser focused tool, a scalpel, not a sledgehammer that breaks the whole structure down. Right. That's just senseless, because then you end up with a big pile of rubble and you can't find the parts you wanted to keep. Right.
So now I feel sort of my government efficiency expert that I spent so many years of my career starting to creep out at me. The very first challenge I will tell anyone, whether you're in private practice or you're in the private sector or government sector or just in your own life, is you have to learn how to identify waste. Right. And that takes knowledge, and it takes skills. It takes the ability to understand what is happening versus what should be happening, and identifying what that delta is between the two, and how to address it. And when you get a guy or a bunch of dudes, a bunch of bros that just come in and just start without any knowledge of how things work, just start breaking things or saying, I don't understand that must be wasteful. That is absolutely the worst thing you can do if you're serious. Again, if you're serious about reducing waste, fraud, and abuse.
And it's not super clear that they were really serious about that. It looks more and more like the project was really, let's destroy as much of government as we possibly can, and then because to build the society, I think, and this is a different podcast too, to build the society that the billionaires want, you have to break government, right? Because that's the only constraint on the amassing of just hyper wealth at scales no human's ever seen. And we don't really know what the world looks like if 90% of the world's wealth is literally under the control of 1,000 or 2,000 people. And that's the universe we're moving toward. That's the universe they're trying to move us toward. And that's the challenge for progressives and for anyone else who thinks that we need to build a society for everyone. And that's why this question of the role of government is so important, right? What kind of constraints do we need to build into it? And
Right.
Scott, we're coming up on 40 minutes now, so we probably don't want to wrap things up a little bit. So we could talk about this for 2 or 3 hours.
We can,
And
especially since you started getting me jazzed up about management and efficiency and effectiveness and all that stuff.
stay tuned next week for Scott K on management and efficiency in government, because that's what I want to hear too. But folks, I just want to let everyone out there know none of this is scripted. Scott and I chat a little bit before we do these about what we want to talk about. We both do a little bit of background research, but some of the spot reports that I'm doing, I'm writing those up and reading those, so they're a lot more scripted. Although I'm not well known, Scott, for staying on script, if you know what I mean. but these aren't scripted. We're brainstorming again. The idea is to kind of stimulate some critical thinking, get some facts out there, right? Let's see if we can wrap our arms around the parameters of the world we live in and the problems that it presents to all of us, and then what we can do as individuals and as groups and as a country to resolve those problems and come to some kind of shared understanding about what right looks like we used to talk about in the Army. So, and any final thoughts before we close, Scott?
Uh, yeah, just one last thing, and it might help set up a future discussion here. As I saw a meme online the other day, and the numbers aren't going to be exactly right, but the principle I think is going to apply. It said that Elon Musk has $287 billion plus or minus, and there's 8 billion people on Earth plus or minus. Why doesn't he give us all $1 billion? He would still have plenty left over.
Yeah, well, we are approaching a place. A lot of conservatives complain about the budget deficits and the national debt, and we are in a way approaching a situation where some number of these super wealthy people, these billionaires, and Musk is close to being a trillionaire. I understand that they could pay the national debt themselves and still have some money left over,
Oh yeah,
right? Or
have
pay a
plenty of
good
money
chunk
left
of it,
over. Yeah,
right? I mean,
the scale of the wealth just boggles the mind. We can't really
yeah,
fathom it. I think that's why we tolerate them.
right. So it's yeah, when you start talking about big numbers like that, people's eyes glaze over, including mine,
Mm-hmm.
right? Your brain just kind of shuts down when you're talking about $1 trillion. And we talked before here about how, when we talked about affordability, Elon Musk doesn't have an affordability problem. He can afford
Right,
anything he wants. He can buy all the $7 dozen eggs he wants and never feel it, never know.
right,
And he finds he finds enough money in the under the cushions in his couches in his houses to pay for some of us to live for a year.
right.
Right.
Or pay
So
off our mortgage.
right. It's a scale that's hard to wrap your head around, but we're going to try to help folks do that, and we're going to try to see if we can do it. Right.
Yeah.
So Scott, this is Stan Scott with Foggy Bottom Line, Foggy Bottom Line Media. You can find us at www.foggybottomline.com. We're on YouTube at Foggy Bottom Line Media, Insta and TikTok at Foggy Bottom Line, and I'm on X and Blue Sky. You can find me there. Scott is still a candidate. We got 3 more weeks left in the election. He's out there beating the streets and talking to people, trying to get the vote out, trying to explain his policy positions and his personal character, which is of the highest I've ever met. And you can find out more about Scott at scottk4va.com. That's Scott K, the number 4 va.com. And you can donate to the campaign there. There's still 3 weeks left. So anything you can drop in the bucket will help bump up the social media buys and the ad buys here as we approach the election. So that's pretty much all I have. Scott,
Right. More
anything else?
importantly, if you're in Virginia, you need to get out and vote. Vote November 4th. And Stan and I would both say vote the blue ticket all the way down.
That's right. Yeah, it's vote the blue ticket all the way down, but do vote. Everyone should go out and vote. That's the only way that's the only way any of us get what we want from government is by showing up to vote,
Right.
and just make your voice heard.
Electing people who can deliver. Yep.
Right. Right. So that's it for this podcast episode. Thanks for listening. Please like, share, subscribe, send us feedback, shoot me an email through the website. Love to hear from you. And if you'd like to support the podcast and Foggy Bottom Line, you can do that at Venmo at Foggy Bottom Line. Scott, that'll do it for today. I'll see you next week. We'll post another one and look for some more spot reports this week as well as we go through and get closer to the election day. All right. Take care, sir.
It's always great, Stan.
Always great to see you.
Carry on.
Carry on. Talk soon.